Okay, tonight we begin.
Wait 1 second, can you smooth that podium back?
Yeah, the cable looks like there's not too much slack in it.
It's usually tight, a little
You don't have, this is it, there's no slack. Unless you. I don't want to stop.
Okay. So tonight again, we're
Oh,
gonna,
so nobody can sit over there, so I want to be able to see everyone, so you can't sit in those first 2 seats. Sharon, Mr. Russo, everybody has to move over so we can see you.
In the future, if we could either have the podium all the way in the back, or we could change
Jackie,
the
I
line.
couldn't see you enough to know. Feel fear.
okay, as I started to say, we're gonna change it around the order of the agenda tonight for obvious reasons. So I'd like to go to item, under
1E.
1E. Okay. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, I'd like to, before we even get to talk about Dr. Gallagher, I did want to talk just for a minute about the process that we use as part of the superintendent search. I've gotten some phone calls and I've heard a little chatter on social media. Why'd you spend all that money if you were just going to hire in-house? I can tell you that Dr. Gallagher told us initially she wasn't applying for the job. So when we started this process, we didn't know that. But even if she had said that she was going to apply for this job, one of the primary jobs of the Board of Education is to hire a superintendent. And we all want the very best superintendent that we can find for Long Beach. It turns out that it's Dr. Gallagher, but we didn't know that until we went out and did that search. The board received 30 resumes, and each board member reviewed every resume. Each board member was given the opportunity to interview. The board would interview any candidate that any board member wanted to interview. So there were no limitations put on us by a search firm. So I think it was money really well spent. We know now that we have the best there is to offer. Many of the expenses involved in the superintendent search would have been ours if the 5 of us had gone out. We would still have been paying all the money, and I think the biggest expense is the ads. So we would still have had those expenses had we done it ourselves. And personally, I don't know about the other guys, but I didn't feel confident that I had the resources or the capabilities to get the pool of candidates that we were able to put together through this process. So I'm really happy with the process. And I'm thrilled that Dr. Gallagher was is our choice. I think she's going to be, she's already shown us that she's going to be a great superintendent, and I look forward to your tenure.
Mr. Manantino. So to say a few words. It's been nearly 2 years since my election to the Board of Education. When I was sworn in, I understood that a board member's most important responsibility was to select and put in place the best superintendent to lead the district. I was soon then aware that I would be facing the selection of a new superintendent and began preparing to tackle the task. As we moved into 2017-18 school year, the board began its quest in earnest. As Mr. Weiss chose to move on, we were presented with a unique proposal from the central office team. They proposed to allow them to run the district as a team during the search and transition to a permanent superintendent. The plan was unique and worked better than I anticipated. Thank you to Dr. Natali and Mr. DeVito for the dedication to this endeavor. During this period, I began to see a new leader emerge. I worked as a teacher in the district for 30 years and have served 5 superintendents. They've all brought a similar style of leadership to the job. Dr. Gallagher has shown herself to be a different style of leader. I've observed her leadership on several committees over the past 2 years. She's a listener, one who hears and respects what people say, and values a person's contribution to the group. She brings empathy and compassion to all she does. Her commitment is to lead the district and help all of our students achieve at their highest level. To accomplish this, she is committed to engaging all of our staff, parents, and board members, along with other stakeholders in a common effort. She recognizes that we all have to engage in this process together, and she will provide the leadership. Her belief in the cliche, "A rising tide lifts all boats," is refreshing. I wish her success and smooth sailing as we embark on this journey together. Thank you.
I also would like to say a few words, not only about Dr. Gallagher, but about the process, as Mrs. Baroma, as well as Mr. Wagner had mentioned. It is one of our most important jobs as a school board trustee to hire the superintendent. I take that very seriously, as well as the other board members who are sitting before you. Even at times, if you're unhappy with the process, you cannot abdicate your role, and it is the most important role we have. So the process was an arduous one. We did have excellent candidates. We included the superintendent from the Island Park School District as part of our team to interview. And the 4 of us did interview those candidates, including the Island Park superintendent. And Dr. Gallagher came out shining, as I expected her to. But it was very nice to work with the consultants. The consultant firm that we used were 3 retired superintendents. They knew what we wanted. They interviewed many different stakeholder groups in our community. And they also sat with the cabinet and got their feedback. So in addition to the survey and all of that, they put together a wonderful team of people for us to interview, and I was very happy with the process. And Dr. Gallagher, I am thrilled that you stepped up and told us that you were interested. And I think part of that decision on your part also came because you were able to work with Mr. DeVito and Dr. Natale during these last 6 months. And I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I really saw such a team effort there with the 3 of you that was just unmatched. I've never seen anything like that before. So I could understand where at that point you realized that perhaps this was for you at this time. So without further ado, I just want to say thank you, and thank you, Mr. DeVito and Dr. Natale, for your participation in this as well and your support. Working as a team is very important on many different levels. And as a board, that's also important. So I'm proud to be part of this team here that interviewed superintendents and put forth Dr. Gallagher for tonight's recommendation as superintendent.
Okay, there's not much more I can add to that. I do have to agree with Mrs. Tagney. Well, it appears that it was an easy decision, but it really wasn't. It was an arduous task, as she said. And the process that we used, I think, saved us months of time. So if you translate that into what it cost, I think it was a fair expenditure. I look forward to working with Dr. Gallagher for the remainder of my term. I think what we're going to do tonight is going to set Long Beach on a course that it's never seen before. And like the rest of the board said, it's going to be an honor to work with her. So I'll call for a vote now. Mrs. Taggy?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Butler?
Yes.
And I joyfully vote yes. We do have cake over there, so we're going to break for
We're going to
Hold,
swear.
hold, hold,
Let's
hold,
swear.
hold, excuse me.
Let's do a quick swearing in.
Quick swearing in.
Oh, we're going to do a quick.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, no, let's do quick swearing. She's got it on her phone.
Yeah. Dr. Gallo, do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that you will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of superintendent according to the best of your ability?
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now you can have.
Wait, can I just say?
Oh, no, you can't have.
I'll be super quick. I am beyond honored and humbled by the board's confidence in me and to be the leader of this district. And I just want to clarify a little bit. As Mrs. Verona said, initially I didn't want to apply for the job. I want to tell you a little bit about that. I was in the classroom as a teacher for 21 years. And, you know, at some points during my tenure, people said, you know, you should be a principal. I said, no, I love what I do. I love what I do. And people said, well, you know, you should think about it. And I said, but I'm able to love children as if they were my own. This is prior to having my own children. Then eventually someone said to me, but if you become a principal, you could love more children as if they were your own. So I did it. And then I said, I'm happy as a principal, never be a district administrator. Somebody said, but you know, as a district administrator, you can love more children as if they were your own. And I think what happened to me over the last 6 months was realizing that A, I work with the finest team of educators, and I'm not exaggerating, that I've ever worked with in 33 years. Teachers, administrators, principals, and especially my team, Dr. Natalian and Mr. DeVito, and that all of these people I work with have a commitment to take care of children as if they were their own. And so to the parents tonight, I make you that promise. That will be my promise to you. Whatever we do, whatever decisions we make as a team, will be about taking care of your children as if they were our own. And to our team, you have my support, whatever you need to do that. And I am so grateful and I'm so excited about the future that lies ahead in Long Beach. So thank you. Now we can So tonight to begin, I'm going to ask Mr. DeVito. He will continue with the budget presentation.
Good evening, everybody. We're going to talk tonight revised budget and projected revenue. You know, as we go through week by week, the budget evolves. So each week, maybe there's a tweak here, a tweak there, and then we have to adjust the revenue accordingly. I'm going to focus on a couple of areas: legal, insurance, supervision. There's some updated special education and psychological social work that I'm just going to touch on briefly, and then co-curriculum transfer to other funds. So, as some of you know who've been to some of these budget presentations, there are about 40 to 50 different function areas, but there's actually over about 3,000 different line items. So you can't do every line item, you can't do every function if you want to also make the presentation meaningful and dig in a little bit. So each year we take a bunch and we go through, and each week we do a little bit and a little bit, and then every few years we cycle through to make sure we hit every function. So these are the areas we're going over today. Legal, and every area has a different number. So legal is A1420, insurance, and so forth. So we're going to cover about 5 different areas today. Our proposed budget, this is the big headline, has evolved a little bit, and what I do with the board is I give them a presentation on a Friday, and then they have a chance to review it, and then we go over it on a Thursday. But I also, because when we're in March, it's week after week, it's a different budget, and we do work in between, give them a little bit of a preview. So this is the number that is going to be in their packet for this week, for the next time we get together. The 140.5, which is an increase of 3.85. I've kept the tax levy the same, and what the difference I have is I'm using a little bit of appropriated fund balance, but we'll get to that in a minute. These are all the different items, the different functions. It's a template that I've used for the past several budget presentations. That hasn't changed. These functions haven't changed. But I did update 2010, which is going to be in the board's packet for next week. 2020, which is what we're talking about tonight. 2110 is also updated. That's going to be in their packet for the next presentation because there were some changes, some little tweaks, as well as 2250. Some staff members that we realized should have been in a different function, they weren't coded properly, and we needed to include some changes there. Everything else is the same as what was in the presentation that the board members got on Friday. No changes here. And again, no changes in transportation. We did that several weeks ago. And then the big item that we're going to talk about is this transfer to other funds, and no changes in any of the other functions. So let's start going right into, here's our total budget that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Let's first go into our categories. Legal. So legal, we have a bit of an increase because we have been having more legal expenses over the past several years. Unfortunately, the district has been involved with different legal matters, and we've been finding that our legal expenses have risen over the past several years, so we have a different baseline. You see here it's increased by about $50,000, basically because of the hourly legal fees that we've incurred over the past couple of years. The retainer hasn't changed too much. Right now we have 3 different specialties. We have general, we have labor, we have construction, and those are how it's broken out. We've extrapolated out to the end of the year. Insurance, we need to increase our insurance a little bit. Our rates continue to go up, especially our flood insurance. Our flood insurance has gone up about 21% over the past few years that we've had flood insurance, that we've amped up our flood insurance after Hurricane Sandy, and we've also had some of our certificates that I have here, certificates for our flood insurance at the administration building and transportation, so we were able to get the increased flood insurance there. Now that we have our new building, we had to get an elevation certificate, and they had to give us a new premium. This is an example of different line items. As you see here, it's in what's called the 400 series, which is vendor services, because when you procure insurance, it's not an employee, it's not equipment, it's vendor services. So we have these 3 different line items for our liability property, our student accident, and our flood insurance. This is just an example of how a category of insurance, a function of insurance, which is 1910, is broken out into different line items. So this is just as an illustration. Co-curricular, very important area that we wanted to talk about, and it was requested by the board members to go over. You see it's function A, 2850. It's going up about 3.5%. And mostly what's in this function are club advisors, as well as some services and supplies that relate to our co-curricular activities. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about the salaries. You see it's going up by about $10,000. It includes the stipends not only for the high school, but the middle school and the elementary as well, and also some hourly supervision costs relating to these activities. So let's take a look at a couple of line items just as an illustration of this. A, 2850, which is co-curricular function. 151, that has to do with compensation. Whenever it's a 1 in this area over here, it has to do with compensation. 21 is middle school. 22 is high school. So basically at the middle school, it's level because we have the same number of clubs, and it's basically about the same. Here at the high school, we have 3 new clubs. All right, so here's the big headline for co-curricular: anime, chess, and mindfulness. We're adding 3 clubs, and we're eliminating forensics. So built into this increase of about 6% are the 2 new clubs net, right? Because we have 3 minus 1, plus the increase in the rates for the new collective bargaining agreement. Here we have some vendor services, so related expenses for, and you see here the detail, hockey league fees, dues for different associations, Odyssey of the Mind, rentals for our musical and our drama productions. Again, some different line items in terms of how this breaks out. in some of those activities that I just mentioned. And supplies, relatively level, I won't focus on that. Supervision, so this has been a big change in terms of last year, or actually current year, I should say. You see a 10% or almost 11% increase. It's not because the administrators are getting a 10% raise, but we have been making some changes, so I want to focus on this. And this we had to tweak a little bit from the Friday version. So let's talk about what's actually included in this. We have, not only the administrators have their increase of 1.75, that was their contractual increase for all the administrators, everybody who is in this code, but we have 2 new elementary vice principal positions, so we had to add that into the budget, one at West, one at Lido, and we're also replacing a portion of a retiring director of adult and alternative programs with a new full-time Nike program coordinator. So because of those changes, this is increasing quite a bit, okay? Here's an example, supervision at West. We're adding that new assistant principal, and that's the approximate salary of the increase there. That was a correction. And then you see here the clerical, so you have a different object code, right? 150 versus 160, so the clerical is in a 160. Different location, 12 is West, 22 is high school, and you see this is relatively level. So this is an example of a line item where the only increase is their step increase on a new salary schedule versus a school here at West where we're actually creating a whole other position at that school in this function. Nothing much to say about equipment. It's just an example of the equipment there. It's relatively level. And here are some vendor services that we use out of that supervision code, whether it's BOCES charges, copy machine rentals, or postage. And here's some line-item examples of those, and supplies. Similar, some line-item examples of the kinds of supplies for the office supplies and interfund transfers. So I need to spend a little bit of time on this area because this is a big change, okay? A big change from where we were. You see our original budget in the current year is about $1.6 million. We're going up 1.3 million. But what's a little bit deceiving, and that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about it, is that it doesn't mean that we have to increase the tax levy by 1.3 million. Some of it is using money we already have. It's just that we have to account now for the expenditure that we're going to make. So let's talk about some of the details here. Transfer to capital for transportation. So we have spent money, I think it was $150,000 in the current year budget to purchase previously owned buses from another school district. They were getting rid of their CNG fleet. It was a great opportunity for us to upgrade our fleet and get some pre-owned, but not necessarily old vintage CNG buses. So I said, we don't need to have a line item for next year because we really need to have some of that money for capital projects in facilities. So I've been trying to buy a new bus, 1 or 2 new buses every year, so it's a rolling type of a replacement policy. So I said, let's forego buying a new bus because we just have about 15 new buses in our fleet and we're retiring some of those older fleets. But what we do need is transfer to capital for facilities. So for example, we needed another $155,000 in this line item so that we can do something that was previously identified in our 5-year capital plan to put new windows at the first floor of West School around the whole building. It has come to our attention that this school really needs new windows, and it's been a concern to us because of security issues, especially of late. We need to replace them. We need to make sure that they can lock and close well. In the case that we're in a lockdown situation, we need to be able to open them so that there's proper ventilation. And I'm recommending that they be replaced. So I have that in the budget to replace those windows on the first floor of West School. Unused prior transfer to capital for facility. You see this $855,000. So what that represents is money that was not spent in prior years. So you see this line item here? Transfer to capital for facilities. We're putting in $973,000 in the past. The district didn't spend all of it. Maybe the project came in under budget, or maybe the district decided not to do the project after all. And this goes back over about 15 years. So I said, now is the time to clear that balance, take that money, and use it for a purpose that we need today. And what I'm recommending is that we replace the seats and the flooring in the Lindell Auditorium because it's badly in need of a renovation, and also create a new culinary arts classroom at the high school. I'll talk a little bit about that more in the next slide. The next one, transfer to capital reserve fund. So we created a line item here so that we can start building up a new capital reserve fund. We have a transportation building that needs to be replaced. It's going to cost about $4 million. We don't have $4 million. How does a district plan to take care of a need that it has now if it doesn't have the money? It starts putting money aside a little bit over a course of several years. It's what we would do in our personal lives. You save for something so then you can purchase it. So this is a way to have enough money so that we can replace that transportation building, let's say 4 to 5 years from now. Now at that time, the board may decide when it's time to spend it that it needs it for a different purpose, but based on what our architect has said, this is a need that we have to address and we need to plan for it. What here is I broke down and I created what I hope is a very easy to understand spreadsheet that lists all of the upcoming capital projects. So install new doors and locks at the middle school and the high school, build new interior cafeteria wall with transom at the high school, build new security vestibule at Nike. These 3 items we talked about last week because the board gave us their approval to put this as a ballot initiative on the vote, as a proposition on the ballot in May, and it's coming out of our existing capital reserve fund. That was last week. How does it differ from what we're talking about this week? This week, we're talking about replacing the first floor windows at West, installing a new storage unit at Nike. That's the $973,000. That's coming as a general fund budget line item that we just talked about. It's going to be in next year's budget. This has to come out of our capital reserve fund. We need voter approval as a ballot proposition. This, all we need is just for our budget to be approved for next year. Then we have these other 2 projects: replace the auditorium seating and flooring at Lindell, and either renovate or create a new culinary arts classroom at the high school. This is reallocating remaining funds, like I explained, that was from prior capital projects that was unspent. Here's this range of about $350,000 to $600,000. So the board has a couple of choices. They could either renovate an existing classroom, where we have our culinary arts program at the high school, and that could cost around $350,000. If they wanted to swap out a different classroom, maybe an arts classroom up on the 3rd floor, because maybe they feel it's a little bit bigger, it maybe would cost about $400,000 or $450,000. But what I'm recommending is that they actually take unused space that's in the very far end of that high school cafeteria, the far east end, and actually create a new classroom with that space. Space is at a premium at the high school. They're always looking for space to do things, and they're always trying to juggle with a very limited fixed space in the building. This is unused space, so maybe for the extra $100,000 or $200,000, they can have a showplace culinary arts classroom that's in the cafeteria that then they can use for different events, when they can, really the possibilities are numerous in terms of how they can showcase this culinary arts program and have it be an alternative to sending kids to BOCES. So we send kids right now to a BOCES program in culinary arts where we actually pay extra money. So I haven't done the numbers yet, but if I take how much we pay to send our kids to a culinary arts program at BOCES and then extrapolate that out, we have to tell you how many years this will pay for itself if our current level of student interest remains the same. But I have a suspicion, similar to what happened with our video, with our TV studio, that once we have it, then it's going to really inspire kids to want to really engage in this program and make a career, right? It's wonderful what our students at the high school are doing with our new video studio over the past several years and what it's done for the student body. Think of what we can do now on the culinary side. And I just think it's a wonderful opportunity now for our district to do that. Transfer to school lunch fund. So this is something that was controversial last year in terms of considering what to do about the gap in our school lunch fund. And we actually got written up. We only had 2 or 3 comments from our auditor this past fiscal year. One of them was that we didn't have the right amount in that transfer to the school lunch fund, because really we're running in excess of $400,000. And the auditor said, listen, I don't dispute so much that you have a gap. That's up to you. That's up to the district that you have a gap. But the fact that you're not putting the right amount as this transfer to school lunch fund, that's what I have a problem with. So they suggested that we come up with the right amount of money to transfer into that fund. So I had conferred with Mr. Camlet, who's here, who's going to talk a little bit about our food services program, and we need to add $50,000 in that line item in order to right-size the allocation. So here's where we get to right-sizing that allocation. Our projected gap in the current year is $397,644. Last year's gap was $437,444. So you see an improvement that we're forecasting for the current year of about 10%. And I'm going to let Mr. Camlet explain why we're forecasting an improvement of about 10%. And part of it has to do with the excitement around Annie's frozen yogurt. So Mr. Camlet, you want to take a few minutes and talk about what's happened with Annie's frozen yogurt, and then we'll conclude the presentation.
Sure. Good evening. We have, this year, we are the second school district on Long Island, and now there are about 8 or 9, we were able to rally the troops, who have brought in Annie's frozen yogurt. Annie's is a product that comes out of Minnesota. It is the only, and it was at the time and continues to be, the only soft serve frozen dessert product that meets all K-12 school nutrition USDA guidelines. So we are able to serve it to the children, and we are able to convert it into what we call reimbursable meals. So the students can purchase this and actually have it count towards the district's reimbursement from the government. It can count towards our entitlement that the government gives us for future food purchases, what we consider the free food that the government gives us. The product has a similar nutrient and caloric profile to regular Yoplait yogurt when you break it down ounce by ounce. It's non-fat, gluten-free, peanut and tree nut-free. It has the same live and active cultures that are in traditional yogurts that make it healthy for the gut. And it's made with real dairy, so it's not artificially sweetened. It is just as close to being an all-natural product as you can have. Currently this year, from Annie's frozen yogurt, we are averaging about $4,300 each month in our reimbursement. That's coming from the students who are paying full price, the reduced meals, and our free students who purchase the yogurt. Estimated yearly amount right now is about $43,000. The revenue, when we take in our reimbursement and we add in the additional revenue for the students who actually come up and give the money, the reduced students actually have to pay a quarter at the time of service, and the full pay students pay $3. So when you combine the money we're taking in at the register with the reimbursements, Annie's frozen yogurt will bring us in approximately $90,000 at the current rate. And after speaking and doing some research with frozen dessert places such as a Tutti Frutti, a Moolah La, Swirls World, and various other places, they get an increase of about 8% over the warm months. And during our school year, those warm months equal April, May, June, and September. So it can go up to about $93,000 at the current rate. Our yogurt counts towards about 85 lunches each day, district-wide, and it's being used in the middle and high school only. So we get an additional 85 meals per day because we're serving the frozen yogurt and capturing it as a meal. The students get granola, they can get fruit with it, and it meets all requirements because it takes in 3 of the components that are required by the government to become a reimbursable meal. Our ADP, our average daily participation, there's a lot of numbers on here. I believe it's actually in the packet if you want to review it. Yes. What this is showing is that between the school year, comparing it to last school year, 16-17, and this year, 17-18, month by month, with the exception of September, we have continually increased by 3.3%, 1.45%, 8%. This past January, we were at 15.64% increase on our average daily participation. And in February, we took a slight drop from January, but we were still up almost 14% on our ADP compared to prior year. One of the differences was the Annie's Frozen Yogurt. Total meals served, they are continuing to increase over prior year as well. We can see, with the exception of September having taken a dip, in October we served over 5,300 more meals in the same calendar month. December was 300, November was 313, December 887, 1,034, and in February we had a wonderful banner month of 3,500 meals more than the prior year February. Okay, free and reduced meals served. There is one change in this chart. When I was entering the numbers, I entered the school years, their data backwards. Our free and reduced meals that are being served are increasing as well. So the absolute values are different here, but we are increasing we're capturing more students who are free and reduced than prior years, significantly. In February, we took a little bit of a dip, but in January, we were almost 1,000 meals more, 1,200, 1,000, 3,000 meals, 3,300 meals more. So our numbers are increasing. The major change in our program, we are introducing a variety of new menu items and the Annie's Frozen Yogurt.
Thank you, Mr. Kalman. So, is Annie's Frozen Yogurt going to save the program? No. And that's not what was helping to reduce the gap. Now, it's still $400,000 gap because inherently the structure of the program, I think, is flawed, right? And we talked about that last year. I'm not going to go into the details. But what it is Annie's Frozen Yogurt is providing an option to students so that they could have something to eat. And you can argue about the level of nutrition, but I still think it's better than some other choices that some of our students are making during the day. Now let me just go back for a minute and go back to the headline, and then I'm going to close. So I want to talk about our revenue slide for a second, and I guess there were a lot of slides. Okay. So right now, and this number will come down a little bit. We still have a couple of weeks left before the board adopts the budget, but we're around, I don't know, I project maybe around $140.4 million, right? Going up probably about 3.8%, which is pretty much the number that I said in December, which is what I had forecasted. I said we're coming in to our budget season knowing we have to increase our budget by 3.4 million, or about 3.4%, because of contractual personnel costs and benefits. There have been some changes. We have added program. We're adding two new assistant principals at the elementary school. We're adding an E&L coordinator. We're adding a program manager. We're adding another program coordinator. We're adding teachers. We're adding courses at the high school. We're adding courses at the middle school. Having the chance over the past week to go through the budget and check to make sure that everything was in it that we said was going to be in it, right? It's a little bit higher than I said where we were last week. Now I'm going to go through it again to make sure that everything is in it and that everything that is in it should be, and that there's nothing else in it. But it does take some time to go through these 3,000 codes to make sure everything's accurate. I'm still recommending that we stay at 3.47% in the tax levy, because I'm concerned if we go out for much more than that, that it may be burdensome, too burdensome to the taxpayer, because it's already over what most people think is this 2%. However, we can go up to 4.1%. If the board were to choose to do that, we can go up to 4.1%. I'd put right now as a placeholder about $500,000 as appropriated fund balance, which is about the same level that we had at the current year. Now, if this budget number comes down a little bit as we take a closer look at some of the codes, I would recommend that we reduce this appropriated fund balance. But this is where we are right now. This is the number that the board's going to get in their packet tomorrow. And again, we have a couple weeks that I'd like to go through codes again, just to make sure that everything that we've talked about over the past 6 months is in there and in there correctly. Anna, questions from the board? That's conclusive.
Yeah. say that we're gonna go up 3.48%. But the tax levy stays the same. Could you explain that?
Yep. We have different revenue sources. State aid, other revenue, which includes tuition that we get from other districts. We get pilot money from the county and from the town. And we have our tax levy, and we can use some of our fund balance. Now, you always have an option to vary the mix. What you can't vary too much is state aid, all right? They give us what they give us. Other revenue, can't vary that too much because whatever we plan on getting, whether it's tuition from other school districts or certain fees that we get for some of the programs and services that we provide, is also something that we project, but we don't have a lot of flexibility there. The pilot is something that's also fixed. So these first three categories, and the reason why I have them as these first three categories is because it's not very flexible in terms of will we get more or not. We may get a little bit more state aid when the new state aid numbers come on March 31st or April 1st. We may get some more, and then at that point the board could consider what they want to do with that. But I don't anticipate getting much more state aid because I don't think that the legislature is going to pass anything that's significantly different from what the governor had proposed. The next is what's flexible. The board gets to determine where they're going to set the tax levy, and it's up to the board to say, do you want to go to the cap, which for us, for next year is 4.1%, or do they want to override the cap, which would then necessitate a supermajority? Or do they want to use some of the appropriated fund balance, right? And that's another choice. Now, right now, we have about $500,000 built into our budget every year because it's our pre-K grant, right? So we put that pre-K expense in the budget. It's about $450,000, and we know we're getting a grant for that kind of money. And that is the money that we have in case something unexpected comes up. We know we have about $500,000 in case something comes up that's built into the budget because we don't pad codes, because we don't do anything to create a surplus. We just have that money that we know is going to get charged to a grant. But what we can do is say every year, we're going to take that money and use it to offset the following year's expenses, right? I was hoping that we didn't have to appropriate any fund balance until I took another look at the budget over the past week and realized that certain things that I thought were in the budget actually weren't in there in terms of a couple of those codes in supervision and curriculum development. And that's where that's from. So that's where there's some flexibility here. This number over here is money from the capital fund. We have it already, and I explained that. So the only real flexibility we have is, do you want to increase the tax levy or decrease the tax levy? Do you want to use fund balance more or less? Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay.
What does that mean for the Long Beach taxpayer? Are his taxes or her taxes going to increase or not?
Absolutely increase. It's at least going to increase if everything of that property owner's assessed value stays the same, 3.47%.
Okay.
At least that. If that property owner's assessed value decreases, okay, they'll probably pay less than 3.47%. If the adjusted base proportion shifts, as it has every year, and where the class 1, which is a single 1, 2, or 3 family homeowner, pays more of its share, then that can increase maybe to 10% or maybe to 15%, as we've seen in the past year. That is a potential. We don't know what the assessed value is going to be. We don't know if the county is going to change the taxable value. We don't know if they're going to change the base proportions. We don't know. So all I can say is that for most people, if everything stays the same, they're going to pay about 3.5% more in taxes. But for some it could go down, and mostly for others it may go up more than that.
Okay. I'm still a little confused because I don't understand then how the tax levy stays the same if it's going up 3.4%.
Who said the tax levy stays the same? I just said it's the same
You
number I
said
had
when
last
you're
week.
gonna
No, I
go-
said it's the same number as last week. That's what I meant. I'm sorry if that was
Oh,
unclear. It's
okay.
the same number I had as last week.
All right. Okay. Okay.
Mr. DeVito, thank you as always for your presentation. I have a hard time following it when I don't have it, and I don't have a lot of the information that's on that. So, and this is our last meeting before we adopt the budget. So this is the last time our many followers out here are going to have an opportunity to talk about it. And I, as their elected representative, can't ask intelligent questions if I don't know before I sit down at this table what's going to be up on those sheets. So I'm a little...
All right, so I'll try to clarify that for you.
Well, it's not a matter of clarifying it, it's a matter of changing the figures, so then I have to sit down and work that through my brain. I understand everything you said, you're very good, but I need this information beforehand. And tonight in particular, I talked last week about how important tonight was, that everything that was gonna come out tonight, so that the public could know about it before we adopted it, and that we could know about it before, well, we obviously will know about it, but you know,
So
that's
maybe-
done, that's a done thing, but I want these presentations in advance. I went over this thinking that this was the figures that we were gonna be talking about tonight, and I get to the third page and it's not even the same.
Well, the total, like I explained, the total is different because I caught an error that was in the presentation from last week. The program itself hasn't changed. What we've talked about in terms of the people, the positions, the program, it's that I found that something that was submitted wasn't the right number.
Okay. Now, I thought when you talked about the increase, you were talking about, you know, a new ENL director and a Nike director and several other positions. I thought that was all a budget neutral transaction, so to speak, that we had the person on our staff now who handles all of those things is retiring, and that between all of the breakups and how they're going to be classified, that it was going to be a budget neutral transaction, as well as the fact that we now have teachers in charge at the elementary schools who are going to be replaced by VPs or APs. And that would be basically a budget neutral.
So I'll explain that to you again. So in the previous version, the version that you got on Friday, what was in the teaching line was there were 2 teachers who were retiring, and what we had as a placeholder was we had what their replacement salary would be by a step 1 or a step 2 teacher. Okay? At that point in time, we were trying to keep certain matters kind of confidential in terms of where our hiring was going to be, right? And it was a placeholder that was in the budget as a vacancy coming in with a new teacher who was at a step 1 or step 2, which is about half of the salary. I didn't think that was really, after thinking about it this week, a fair representation of what might be in terms of next year. Because what might happen is that the teachers in charge may actually become teachers again. And they would be filling the vacancy of a teacher who's retiring. And that we may actually be hiring a new assistant principal with a new salary level. And then, so to actually show a savings, I felt was not something that may actually happen. So I needed to add $150,000 back into that line because when I first thought that there was going to be a savings, I realized that there really isn't, because it's actually going to be neutral in terms of no savings there. So I had to add $150,000 back into the teacher line, as well as add those 2 new positions into that supervision line.
Okay, got it. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Now, I'm moving on to capital projects. I am on the capital project subcommittee, so I've listened to and really understood, I think, all of these capital projects conversations. And we had talked about replacing the carpeting and the seats at Lindell Auditorium. But then we had also talked a lot about the ventilation issues in some of the buildings, particularly in East School and West School and the middle school. I guess my question is, and maybe it's not a question for you, maybe it's a comment more to my fellow board members. Personally, I would like to pursue the air conditioning / ventilation issues at those 3 schools before I replace creaky seats at Lindell Auditorium. That's not really a question for you, right? maybe the question for you is, how much does that cost?
So I'm waiting for our architect and Steve Leahy to get me some final numbers, because I got some numbers from each of them that differ. And I'm trying to make sure that it's accurate before I share it with the board. But what's also a concern is how it impacts our energy performance contract. So I had sent an email to Honeywell to find out how we can now change our baseline energy usage and still be able to benefit from the reduction in the energy services that they guaranteed. So they guaranteed that we would get a certain level of savings as part of the deal. Now, if we put in units, and what we talked about and what we could do, and what would be most economical is room units that we put in the windows, okay? Because this way we wouldn't have to put chillers, expensive chillers up on the roof. But what is gonna be our mechanism to regulate the energy usage? How do we come up with a baseline? How do we determine if the savings that Honeywell said they were going to achieve for us is actually because of energy saving measures, when now we're putting in devices that is going to lead to greater energy usage? Because once you have an air conditioner in a room, it's going to be determined, every person is, or teacher or staff member is going to determine whether they feel for their comfort it's going to need to be on or not, or it's going to need to turn on high or low, right? And if we're trying to save energy usage, it's going to be very hard to now put units in every room that is going to potentially increase our energy usage. And then what's the sense of having this energy performance contract? That takes time. I can't do that by April 2nd, April 12th. We can take a look at it, but you can certainly defer and say, you know what, the board, that's board choice. I don't want to replace the auditorium seating at Lindell. I'll wait and not spend the $250,000, and let's see. And we can do something next year, right? The board can certainly do that.
Okay, well,
Okay, so then I guess I would like to know the board's thoughts about that, because my preference would be to not spend, just like we're gonna put $400,000 in an account in an attempt to at one point have the $4 million we need to replace the transportation building. I think that we should, at the very least, not spend money on squeaky seats and put that money aside so that we can save the money we're gonna need for a ventilation/air conditioning solution in some of our buildings. What does everybody else think?
I would like to wait till we get the numbers and we do the Honeywell study, and then see where we stand with, which would be more economical and easier to do.
But that's not gonna happen by April 12th, so we either, do you wanna leave the $250,000 in the budget and spend it on the Lindell seats?
Oh, I think we're gonna leave it in the budget, even if we don't spend it, we would defer it till next year, and then the money would still be in the capital fund, right?
can you do that?
Can you do that, Mr. DeVito?
We don't have to spend it, it'll still be in the capital fund. But what our auditors have recommended is that if we don't spend it next year, that we actually put it back into the general fund
So
as
we have
fund balance.
a couple of months before we have to make that
But we can certainly then use that fund balance for the following year. So we only have a couple weeks to decide whether we're gonna act on it and put it as part of this year's budget. Then we'd have to wait a whole year, actually, if we wanted to do that.
So if we put it back in the reserve fund,
We'd have to wait a whole year.
So we have a month to decide that. So
Yep.
maybe we can get some of those.
Well, at our next meeting, we would have to decide at our next meeting is when we adopt the budget, so.
Well, maybe by then we can have some preliminary numbers to get an idea of.
We can have, I'm sure we'll have more information than we have today.
Okay.
As a former parent of 4 children who went to Lindell School and graduated from there, I always felt that noise added character to any event we went to. To this day, it brings me right back to all the years I spent in that school. Whenever I hear the squeaky seats and a handle, falling onto the floor or whatever. It really does. It brings me back to the memories of my children going to that school. I think Lindell Auditorium is actually quite beautiful. So I would also agree with Mrs. Verona as far as saving that money right now. And, the ventilation situation I discuss with you every single year about west and east. That's why we went with fans in every room, because I could not believe that children would be in those rooms during that time. So I think it's something we really have to wait to get more information on. And I would prefer not spending the $250,000. I do think it adds character
Okay.
to the building.
Yeah, sometimes the squeaky seats are annoying, but I don't think that's a priority. However, window units are gonna cost us a lot of money and energy. So I don't see that as a solution, unless you were buying 10 units or something, but to do an entire school in window units, it won't work. Because you, like you said, you can't control it. You know, one teacher will have it at 68, one teacher will have it at 74, one teacher will have it at 60. It won't work. So I think in the next week or so, we really have to look at this hard and make a final decision on this one.
On the other hand, I think that spending money to showcase our culinary arts program is a wonderful investment. I think that, you know, we often talk about giving alternatives to our children that aren't necessarily academic. We put a lot of emphasis on that. So to offer other choices, I guess it would require, you know, it would probably still be college if you wanted to become a chef or something. I don't even know. But at the very least, it would offer alternatives to our students who don't necessarily want other things that we offer. So I wholeheartedly think that we should spend the $600,000 and get the culinary arts program that can be showcased. What does everybody else think?
I agree.
I agree.
I do have a question. I'm nodding, help us. I have a question regarding the West School windows. That figure, does that include the window treatments that are needed on those windows? Shades and things like that?
I don't know.
I mean, they're at ground level, so if you're talking about security and you're talking about other reasons to replace those windows.
I mean, I'll have to check, but what it is that it allows you to open up the window to a certain amount
Right.
for safety reasons. Right now, we have to put different stops in the windows, so it has those automatic ways in which it opens and what way it opens. But I don't know if it includes shades. My sense is it doesn't.
So that would be
yeah.
an additional expense for us. Are
Yeah,
there
I can
something
find
on those
out.
windows now?
They have different things on the windows, it varies, but unfortunately, the windows have become so opaque that it almost acts as shades because it was a certain kind of a plexiglass, it's not really glass, and over the years it's yellowed and it's aged, so it almost looks like it's frosted.
Can I ask a question regarding the culinary arts program, which I think would be a great addition, but can we determine the cost of a student at BOCES so that we can show the taxpayer how much money we'll be saving by returning those students back?
We have those figures, so for example, students that go to Long Island High School for the Arts, it's an additional tuition that we pay, as well as the culinary program. I don't have that number in my head, maybe you have it, Dr. Gallagher?
I believe it's $30,000, including transportation there and back.
Per student.
Per student.
Roughly how many students take part in that program?
So,
Or
now,
each year?
I might be wrong on this. I believe there are 5 there now, so 5 yearly. However, we sent about 30 in total to BOCES programs, and we have tons of students who are interested in the culinary programs we currently offer, which aren't state certified. So I think Mr. DeVito is correct that not only would we pull the BOCES students back, we would generate other student interest and potentially other student interest from other BOCES programs. So there's potential for that to be very cost efficient.
Mr. DeVito,
Are you talking about culinary arts?
no.
Okay, then I'm not done. I do want to say, just so everyone knows, that Mr. DeVito had told us, and Dr. Gallagher had told me, that one of the reasons we need to do this renovation of the culinary arts program is to get it state certified, that our current culinary arts offerings don't, and our facilities don't meet the standards. So that's part of the reason why we need to do this renovation. Okay, so I just have, I'm just wondering, this is a silly question, but why is the district going to be buying band shoes for the marching band?
What?
Why is the district
So that they
going to be purchasing band shoes for the marching band?
So-
For those of us that spend that $22 year after year.
some of our students don't come to band with the shoes, and so this way we know we're uniform.
But the parent, but the child is, so these are just for students who are not responsible, or it sounds like it's for every student? I mean, they're only $22.
So the information that I had is that there are many students that don't come to band with the right shoes, and this
Okay.
way we don't have to worry about that. That
Okay.
part of
I think maybe we should get all those parents whose kids dropped out of band to still need their old shoes, because they only wear them like 4 or 5 times. I can't wear my kids' closet.
Great idea.
Okay. Okay, so I just have 2 more major questions. And again, I think my initial point on this is going to be directed more to the board than it is to you, Mr. DeVito. We're increasing our extracurricular, total secondary extracurricular budget by $11,000. And that includes $2,000 for band shoes. Okay, so we're increasing it really not by a lot. And we're increasing our subsidy to a program that loses $400,000 a year by $50,000. $11,000 for something that impacts our kids, student engagement, from the time, we'll even take elementary out, but from the time these kids get into middle school, one of the key ways that we can keep these kids engaged is through whatever extracurriculars interest them. And then as the kids move into high school and really get into understanding what it is that they know and love, that's what does it for a lot of kids. There are kids that come to school only because of our classes, or only because of athletics, or only because of Bible Congress. They don't like school, but that's what gets them. And once we have them, then we have a chance to really make them blossom, for lack of a better term. So I'm just I'm saddened by the fact that we're spending so much money on food services and so little money on extracurriculars. So I'm wondering what other people on the board think about that.
Well, I'm taking on an individual basis as far as recommendations go from the high school and from Mr. Epstein and from and from Dr. Gallagher as to whether or not children are asking for things and they're not getting them.
Well,
Just to have money in the budget.
I don't think that's quite fair, only because students I don't know how it is at the middle school, but students at the high school, when they come, and I'm not blaming the administration, this is what they've been told to do, but when you go to administration and say, I want to form a new club, or whatever, they say, okay, well, we either have to wait for somebody else to close, or for us to stop it because enrollment at that extracurricular is down. So children, it's not just like I could go there tomorrow and say, I want a forensics club, and they would do it, or I want a foreign language honor society, or whatever my particular interest in. There's a whole process that they have to follow, and they have to wait for another club to go away. So I just think that's wrong.
Do you have a number on how many clubs we offer our students? Because I was always under the impression it was a very robust
We do.
extracurricular.
We do have a very robust co-curricular program. We were going over it recently, and if I'm not mistaken, there were about at least 25 different clubs at the high school.
And there are about, I was just doing some work on this week, there are about 350 students at the high school who are involved in clubs, more than one. And that doesn't account for sports.
Would you be advocating to the board a certain club that we're not looking at or we're not adding?
So I do think Mrs. Verona makes a point, and that point is that for the past few years, the culture has been very restrictive on clubs. I know that, there has been interest in a foreign language honor society, Red Cross Club, but I think that we've kind of developed a culture where, you know, unless there's really strong interest and strong organization among the students, they don't ask. So I do think that if we were to say to the high school staff and students that we are open to putting more clubs in, we would have more clubs, yes.
I would like to have that information. I would like that survey done so that the board would know.
Well, I asked, we had gotten from the high school over the summer, a list of all the clubs for the 16-17 school year that had been asked to be formed, and that had, so last year, that had, what clubs had, students had, and this is all student generated, no teacher generated or board member generated clubs allowed. So we got a list of the clubs that students wanted to form and what happened with them. There were a number of maybe 10 or so clubs on the list. I asked Dr. Gallagher for a list for the 17-18 school year to see where kids are at and how many kids, and there was nothing. That list was a list of existing clubs. It wasn't kids came to me and wanted to form a whatever club. So that list, so maybe that's the research that needs to be done. What are kids asking for that we're not able to provide for them because we don't have the money budgeted.
So in that, in what I gave you and what I received from the high school, there were a few clubs that were turned down mostly because they could fit within existing clubs, the art club, for example.
Those were all in our memo from last July, so that doesn't, so that's what I'm saying, so in the
That doesn't happen easily.
okay. All right, and so specifically, I see from 16-17 that the anime and the chess club had asked to form, and at the time, anime was going to be Tide Club, the newspaper club, and that was going to meet their needs. But now, I guess we find that that's not true because we're having an anime. The chess club was going to be met informally by claim with Mr. Myers in the library. And I see nowhere in this that in the 16-17 year, anybody asked for a mindfulness club, yet we're forming a mindfulness club, despite the fact that no student has asked for it.
This was July, and what I gave you was this year.
I understand, but that's what I asked you for, a list of the kids that had come forward to. Okay, so maybe that's our miscommunication. All right, and I have my same complaint about forensics. We're still closing the forensics club because students can take the forensics class and that will meet their needs for their interest in forensics, but it's not that easy for these kids, and I think that that's why our kids ask for extracurriculars. They can't fit this stuff into their schedules, so they say, I'm willing to give up my free time when I could be home, bugging my mother or on the computer, to spend time in this club.
So, two things. The forensics club dissolved this year kind of its own due to a few factors. So it was not just because of the class, it had already kind of dissolved. But I think back to your point and to Mrs. Jackie's point, maybe the answer to this question is a more robust student survey about what clubs they would be interested in if they were given the opportunity to form them. I think what I gave you were the students who had gone through the club formation process, which is rigorous. I do believe there's probably more interest, and if the board would like, I can get that information very quickly, like tomorrow.
I would like that, but I also, do we run clubs with a certain minimum amount of student involvement?
Yes.
What is that number?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Mr. DeVito, in the budget, is there a line for an additional psychologist or social worker at Nike?
Yes.
Are you finished, Mr. Malinsky? Thank you, because I wasn't.
Well, you had told me you were doing the culinary arts and then you went on to something else. But if I offended you, I apologize.
Okay, so I guess I didn't hear from Mr. Malinsky and Mr. Wagner about how they feel about extracurriculars.
I would like to get the survey results back and see if we're missing anything that the students are looking for. And if so, then if we have enough student interest, we can find a way to fund the program if we have the money in the budget this year. If not, we will certainly make sure the money is set aside so they can start forming new clubs next year. Possibly we have the money now if we know if the student interest exists.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I'm just going to put this out there. Again, this has nothing to do with you and your presentation. I am thoroughly opposed to increasing the stipend that we use to subsidize the food service plan. I appreciate, and I've said this before, but I appreciate the fact that Annie's frozen yogurt is making a difference, but I don't think Annie's frozen yogurt, I know it meets all the guidelines, and I know it's a reversible meal, I get that. But in my mind, eating frozen yogurt, even that meets the guidelines, is not a good lesson to be teaching our children. I don't want my child eating frozen yogurt or thinking, gee, this is cool, I can eat frozen yogurt every day for lunch. So I'm completely opposed to that. I know, I certainly am not going to vote against a $140 million budget because of a $50,000 difference in a subsidy. That drives me crazy every year, particularly in light of the fact that by law, food service programs are supposed to be self-sustaining. We get around it by putting it in our budget, so technically the voters approve it, and then we can give them as much money as we want. But by law, the program is supposed to be self-sustaining. So, there's a disconnect there for me that, I know we went through this last year, and I should just be quiet about it, but I just have to get my thoughts about it. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you, Mr. DeVino, for the presentation, but can you explain clearly, in the upcoming capital projects, you have the voter referendum that you're asking us to approve for the transfer?
Yeah, just want to get to that slide. You're referring to
Yes.
what was approved last week? Yeah.
Can you just please clarify for the voters and the public here that that's not an increase to the budget?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We have right now about $2.8 million in our capital reserve fund. A few years back, we had close to $8 million in our capital reserve fund. That was over the course of several years, different types of ways, whether an annual operating surplus was used to fund that capital reserve fund. And if those of you in the room or the board may remember, when the carport ceiling at the high school collapsed and we needed to fix it, that was a funding source for us to put in the new carport ceiling. It cost about over $5 million. So a capital reserve fund is very advantageous to a school district to have money set aside if some unexpected capital need arises. So we have about 2.8 left. We can't fund it anymore, right? In terms of the term to fund it has expired. But it's always good for a school district to have a capital reserve fund that they can fund in the event that either there's a line item in the budget, like I have in next year's budget, for $400,000 to put money towards that new fund, or if at the end of a given year, our revenues exceed our expenses, and we can use it to put in the fund as well. What is required is a vote. The voters actually have to approve the use of the capital reserve fund. There's no additional tax impact because we have the money already. We just have to ask the voters for permission to spend it. So we have to ask.
Can we clarify that we're not adding that money to the budget? If they, by voting yes, they're not adding to the tax line.
Correct. They're not, you're not adding to the budget,
Correct.
nor are you adding to the tax levy.
Can we just
It's a
make sure
separate
that's clear?
proposition, it's a separate item. Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I did have one more question. It's really for Mr. Camlett. I think you mentioned that with the Annie's frozen yogurt, our free and reduced children pay $0.25 and our regular paying students pay $3. ask the kids, do we know if I go up and I'm a free and reduced child and I'm buying frozen yogurt, does everybody in the world know that I'm free and reduced because I'm only giving you a quarter instead of $3?
Now, sometimes, you know, the machine, the POS system, cash register, many students go up all the time and on a cashless system, because if I go up and I don't bring money, how do you know that I'm free, or if my parents didn't put money on my account? There's no way for you to know because it's facing the cashier only, not the students on the other side of the line.
Okay, but assuming that's true, assuming I'm free,
Yes.
I still have to give you a quarter. My parents are not putting any money on my account.
No, if you're free, you don't have to give anything.
Okay, so if I'm reduced, my parents are not giving me any money, I'm still giving you a quarter.
What happens if you had $2.75 in your account and you didn't know?
I know, but you don't. What happens if you don't is my concern. I'm not worried about the kids who are cashless. I'm worried about the kids that are handing you $3, or, most importantly, the kid who's handing you a quarter.
It's no different than any other meal options we offer. So all of our transactions are confidential. Nobody can see or know what's going on, how much money is being transferred by cash, or what's on the system loaded onto a prepaid account.
So-
There's no way for anybody to know that.
Theoretically, somebody could say, oh, the fact that I'm giving the cashier a quarter and I'm walking away with a frozen yogurt, that means I'm a reduced student because I only gave a quarter. Somebody could maybe guess or divine that. But if somebody else says, I have $2.75 on my account, I'm actually a paid child, I just need a quarter in order to make the balance, then somebody would be, you know, coming to an incorrect conclusion by saying, oh, Michael just gave a quarter, so he must be reduced, where in fact, I am a paid student, I already have $2.75 on my account.
If you're giving a quarter every day though, you know, like,
If somebody-
yogurt kids are yogurt, I mean, we're having a significant increase in our ADP because kids are buying yogurt every day. So the chances of what you have hypothesized happening and what I have hypothesized happening, I think my scenario is gonna happen a lot more often than yours.
Can I make a
Possibly.
suggestion?
Sure.
I'd like to offer you and the rest of the board the opportunity to come to the high school and go to middle school any day that we're serving yogurt, and come and watch and observe. We can stand in the background, we can watch, you can ask questions, and any questions that you may have, you can ask and see it at that time.
Do I have to do a quarter or $3 if I want yogurt?
$3.
We can't address that here because then everybody would know.
You really had to get $3.50, so $2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. Okay. Any student organization announcements? No? Questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda only?
Hi, Sharon Powers, 509 Lincoln. I have a couple of questions for you. One, thank you, Mrs. Verlin, for bringing up the yogurt issue. I have problems with that too. I know I've spoken about this a couple of times, but a couple of questions. How many people, Mr. Camlet or anyone else know, how many of the students get more than one yogurt for lunch? Because I know sometimes they can get 2 meals. Do we know?
When I go in, look, I'll check that out.
Okay, I'm sorry. How many of them get yogurt plus a drink? One of those drinks that have 26 grams of sugar in them as they have already, plus the yogurt that has 26 grams of sugar? Do we know how many grams of sugar the drinks have?
That depends on which drink that you're referring to, and I don't have those numbers on pairings and meal options of if they buy yogurt, what else are they buying with it.
Do you limit them? Like if I want to go and get 2 yogurts and an iced tea, can I get that?
Not in middle school, in high school, we do allow them to make 2 purchases.
So potentially, I could be getting 75 grams of sugar for lunch, which is horrid. And then you're sending them back to class, completely sugared up. If I were to get, and if we offered carrot cake, which has vegetables in it, leave. I mean, I'm just wondering how far this is gonna go. And I totally, I still like this yogurt for lunch. And I think, do we also know, I'm sorry, how many calories it has?
Let me ask you a question. Do you have a problem with, or any concerns with them buying a traditional Yoplait or a Chobani yogurt? Because nutritionally speaking, this is right there, it's the same kind of a concept. The same thing, it's just one's frozen, and we have to get out of our mind the concept that, and the image that we're serving ice cream, which we're not serving ice cream, we're serving frozen yogurt.
Right, I do know that you did your research. I still have a hard time believing that something frozen could still be alive. I know it has live cultures, and I'm sure you've done your research. But do you, how many calories did you say? How many of it has yogurt and granola and everything on top? Do we know how many calories we're giving them?
I don't know that.
Do we have concern that we're making our children obese? You know, we're giving them lunch every day with granola, and I think this is horrible. And if we're doing it more for our reduced lunch people and all this, we're not giving them the nutrition that we should be giving them, and I think it's a wrong decision. The other thing is, last year, we talked about trying to, we shelved doing everything with food services for a year. Mr. Bobby, you mentioned you wanted to do more research when we talked about it last year. Everyone said that they were going to take it under advisement for a year because we were rushing. Have we made any progress in looking about this? Because to me, to still be putting $400,000 loss every year is horrible, and we need to do something about that.
Can I answer that, Mr. Meninsky? We had agreed as a board that during this year of the team approach to the superintendent, to the running of the district, that we were going to put any new initiatives on hold. So there really has been no work done on that, in that regard. There was a lot of work put into it last year, but between transportation and other things, we agreed that we were going to hold off on that.
So I have you aware that we're going to be doing that next year?
Not gonna happen.
Not going to happen?
It's gotta stop. The bleeding has to stop.
Right, so what, I mean, yogurt is not the answer.
And it's something the board has to discuss, so.
I just haven't heard any movement, so it'd be nice
Well,
to
like
know.
Mrs. Verona said, other issues came up.
So we're, okay, so this year
We
we're
didn't
going
forget.
to do something. No, neither have I. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? No, okay. Presentations of the superintendent.
Sure. I'd like to take certificate of personnel items 1, A through D. We already did E.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, I'll call for vote. Mrs. Taggy?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I'd like to congratulate Mr. Patrick Kiley Rendon, who is our new Director of Instruction. I'd like to ask the board to take item 2, non-certificated personnel.
Okay.
Motion.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? No. Okay, I'll call for a vote. Mrs. Taggy?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I'd like to take items 3 and 4 together.
Motion. Second.
Okay. Any discussion? No? Okay, Mrs. Taggy?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, that's it, right? Okay. Any additional new or old business?
I just have one comment. I just would like to congratulate Mrs. Conley and East School for wonderful dancing classrooms. It was a wonderful evening, a lot of fun. Mr. Watson, just a great night. Thank you.
I had a couple of things. When we had our transportation budgetary presentation, Mr. DeVito had asked us as a board recommendations for us, and while they are budget neutral, and I think that we need to decide on them. I understand we don't have a full board tonight, so we might want to wait till the next meeting to vote on these or to talk about them. But he had recommended stopping transportation to religion for elementary students, and for, I guess this would only affect elementary as well, providing, is it middle school gets more than one alternate stop or no?
No, it wasn't one stop.
Yeah, well, Mr. DeVito recommended providing only one alternate stop for all students in the district. So I would like to just raise that now, that maybe we could all think about it, so we could talk about it at the next meeting, make a decision before, as I said, I believe they're budget neutral decisions, yes, Mr. DeVito?
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of us before the end of the year deciding that. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to our videographer, Dane, whose last name, what is your last name?
Deep Pasquale.
Dane DiPasquale, who has been really dedicated. I don't think anybody watches our videos, but he's been very dedicated putting them together. And he was here last Thursday night until whatever time we finished. And then the next night, and the next night, and the next afternoon, he was in Greece. So that means that not only is he here, but he's practicing an awful lot, and it was wonderful. But I just want to thank you for your dedication. You're doing a really great job.
Thank
And
you.
you're awesome in the show.
Great job.
Do you eat the yogurt?
Yes, yeah. So I wanted to get up. I didn't want to make a
Okay.
big deal. But I've eaten yogurt for about. I've eaten yogurt for weeks straight, and I can tell you that it tastes very good. And I've eaten it for weeks straight, and I haven't gained a single pound. So it's.
That's because you never sleep when you're always running around.
But yeah, that's my input.
I'm gonna leave it. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Questions and comments from the public? No? Okay. Teachers Association.
Congratulations on the board and finding your superintendent. Congratulations, Dr. Gallagher, on your appointment. I'd like to welcome our new Director of Instructional Technology. I look forward to working with you, and I'll see you in 3 weeks.
Rupi?
Hi. If I could, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but the administrator's view of clubs, I think, middle management, which is what I consider us are, it's important to know. I probably have gotten every year a request at maybe sometimes I get an inventory to add a new team. Along with all of that, we have fiduciary responsibilities as administrators, so we're balancing that. It's not that you don't want to offer. There's a lot of other factors that come into offering clubs. For example, we have Monday morning meetings in the afternoon requirements, or down to 4 total days of all this, right? And now you're talking about extra help, that's 2 days. So, you got to really look at what kids can actually go to, along with the number that you're offering, and what days they are, and also contractually, if teachers can, and it's not a Christmas, just contractually, they can offer extra help at any point. Right? So a kid could want to go to a club on one day, but that club asks for extra help. It's something complex. It seems simple, but to me, administratively, it's not as simple as that, as just adding another club. You could add it, but then that kid who you got that list from can't go because they have other issues that they want to do. So it's not, we have it's a little bit more simple than just doing that. Not to mean to simplify, but it's, I'll stop now because I know it's late, but there's, from the middle management, it is a balance, and it's also a factor of what kids want versus what you can afford, and it really is something, it wasn't like cut off like 1 for 1. It was cut off, and now you also have, the other thought I have is the other thing that I keep going back to is at the high school, you now hopefully have an administrative team who's been there, okay? This has to have a process. And what you all are saying to me is there's no process, right? Kids can come there's no real process, so whether they want to request a process, how that all works. There is, but it's not, you know, hopefully as the high school administration, as a leader there for more than 2 or 3 years, they'll come up with the right process, right? So, and what's also happening is you may have to put money aside and say to the principal, you know, you don't have to spend it. You can form it.
When we're, because that's a priority for me, when we're willing to spend money on other things.
I didn't take it as criticism. I was adding my expertise, such that I have the limited expertise that I have. Just telling you the amount, what goes in, and what I would have. We would have, Mr. DeVito, I requested something this year. It's not the first thing I requested to add in a number of years. Then we've taken it back, and that has to be part of this. Is that, and we also have to say no for you. You know, we have to, you know, sometimes we have to be the guys that say no. You know, sometimes you'll have to set up a process where anytime a kid comes up here and and asks you for something, you know, maybe we're the bad guys. So, and I don't mean it that way, but there has to be a process so that it's done. That's the only way I'd like to say that, because I think it's more than what's kind of, you hand in a petition, you get a club. I think it's more than that, and I think we need to, and I'll be willing as the administrator to form a team to do it. I've talked to Mr. Myers about all this and how we add and stuff. Because I watch my clubs, Ms. Rona, I went back, and it's not an IB dance club, it's a dance club, and I went back again, because you have to push us, right? And I went back and I checked. They had a meeting today. I looked in the room and saw how many kids are there. That's part of the oversight of this, and that's another piece that we have to get in to best use our money effectively in Norfolk. There are a lot of things. Thank you.
Just one correction only. Your experience isn't limited. Not CTA, Group C. Anyone? No? Okay. PTA.
I'm back. I just want to say congratulations, Dr. Gallagher. I'm thrilled that you have the position. I know you're the best person for the job, without any doubt. And I want to mention something no one else has mentioned. I think this is our first female superintendent in the district, and I'm delighted that you have broken that glass ceiling, so thank you. And I also want to welcome Mr. Kyle Renton, and I know you're going to do great stuff for us, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just one question, because there are a couple of parents here, and maybe this affects them. What happens if on April 6th, the day of vacation that we're losing because of Wednesday snow day, what happens if you don't send your kid to school that day? Is that an excuse that even if you say?
I'm going to answer this very carefully.
Okay.
We are bound to code absences by codes that are offered by the state, and there are very specific reasons that we can code absences are excused. Even if we were inclined to think differently, we cannot change that. So if your child is sick, or if you have an approved doctor's visit, or a college visit, and there are a few others that's late, and I've been up since last night. But those, exactly, religious holiday, those are excused absences. If your child is absent for another reason, including unfortunately vacation, it's an unexcused absence.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.